When he put on that fedora and he strung on that whip, he gave shape and attitude and style and vulnerability. I owe Harrison a great personal debt.
Steven Spielberg has directed more than 150 actors across 5 decades of filmmaking. Only 6 of them, according to his own words in interviews and documentaries over the years, left a mark on him that never faded. This is not a list he ever announced on a stage or wrote down for a magazine. It is a pattern that emerges when you look closely at who he keeps calling back, who he trusts with his most dangerous scenes, and who he speaks about differently than everyone else. 6 names. 6 very different kinds of bonds. And together they explain something quiet but important about how the most successful filmmaker in history actually works behind the camera. Start with the partnership that defines his later career. Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg have made 5 feature films together, beginning with Saving Private Ryan in 1998 and continuing through Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, Bridge of Spies, and The Post. Beyond that, the two of them have produced sweeping television projects including Band of Brothers, The Pacific, and Masters of the Air. Before any of that existed, though, Hanks was hesitant. He has said in interviews that he had seen good friendships get wrecked by bad working experiences on film sets, and he did not want to gamble a potential friendship with Spielberg on a single production. He agreed to Saving Private Ryan anyway, and what happened during preparation became one of the most talked about stories in modern Hollywood. Spielberg wanted his cast to feel the exhaustion and fear of real soldiers, so he sent his lead actors through a punishing boot camp in the English countryside, overseen by former Marine Captain Dale Dye. The actors slept little, ate less, marched through cold rain, and were stripped of their real names in favor of numbers. Hanks, despite being the biggest star in the group, was addressed only as a number like everyone else. Partway through the ordeal, the younger actors, worn down and furious, took an informal vote on whether to walk out. Every one of them wanted to quit, except Hanks, who convinced them to stay because he believed the suffering would show up on screen. Vin Diesel, who was part of that cast, later recalled his disbelief that a star of Hanks's stature would voluntarily endure that kind of misery rather than simply refusing it. Spielberg has repeatedly compared Hanks to Jimmy Stewart, the classic embodiment of decency in old Hollywood, and has said publicly that Hanks gives audiences hope that ordinary people can still matter in the world. Long before Hanks, there was Harrison Ford, the actor most people instantly associate with Spielberg's love of adventure. Ford played Indiana Jones across 4 films spanning nearly 30 years, from Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981 through Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in 2008. The most famous story from that collaboration happened almost by accident during the Tunisian shoot for the first film. The production was hit by a dysentery outbreak that swept through more than 100 crew members, and Ford was among the sickest. Spielberg, oddly enough, avoided illness by bringing his own food from England and being almost comically cautious about what he ate and touched. On the schedule that day was an elaborate sword fight, a lengthy choreographed duel meant to take days to shoot. Ford, barely able to stand, walked up to Spielberg and suggested simply shooting the swordsman instead of dueling him. Spielberg had been thinking the same thing, and they filmed it that way in a matter of minutes. The moment where Indiana Jones looks unimpressed by an elaborate display of swordsmanship and casually shoots the man dead became one of the most quoted scenes in adventure film history. That kind of instant creative trust defined their entire working relationship. Spielberg later tried to bring Ford in as the lead of Jurassic Park, and when Ford turned it down, Spielberg has said he was not just disappointed, he was genuinely crushed, which tells you how much weight Ford's presence carried for him. Before Ford, there was Richard Dreyfuss, and the story behind their bond begins with one of the most notoriously difficult productions in film history. Jaws, released in 1975, was plagued by a mechanical shark that constantly malfunctioned once it hit saltwater, a shoot that ballooned from a planned 55 days to nearly 160. Spielberg has said he genuinely feared the failure would end his career before it began. In the middle of that chaos was Dreyfuss, playing the marine biologist Matt Hooper, a role Spielberg reshaped around him after Dreyfuss pushed hard for the part. The shared hardship of that production forged a real creative bond, and when Spielberg made Close Encounters of the Third Kind 2 years later, he wanted Dreyfuss again, even as major stars like Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, and Gene Hackman were being discussed for the role. Dreyfuss campaigned relentlessly for the part, and Spielberg has openly credited him with talking his way into it. What makes this relationship stand apart is something Spielberg has said explicitly, that casting Dreyfuss as the obsessed everyman Roy Neary was, in some sense, a way of putting himself on screen. Dreyfuss has gently pushed back on being called Spielberg's alter ego, insisting he is his own person, but he has also acknowledged the deep creative overlap between them, saying there was something genuinely childlike in both of their approaches to those films. Then there is a relationship built almost entirely on fear and admiration rather than familiarity. When Spielberg made Lincoln in 2012, he needed an actor capable of embodying Abraham Lincoln with total conviction, and the actor he wanted, Daniel Day-Lewis, had already turned him down once, back in 2003, believing the role did not suit him. The part sat for years with Liam Neeson attached, until Neeson, feeling he had aged past the role, personally urged Spielberg to pursue Day-Lewis again. This time, with a tighter script focused on Lincoln's final months, Day-Lewis agreed, but only after requesting a full year to prepare. He read over 100 books about Lincoln and built a voice for the president based on historical accounts, describing it as higher and softer than the deep, booming voice most people imagine. He recorded that voice and sent it to Spielberg privately, and Spielberg has said that when he played it, he did not hear an actor performing, he felt as though Lincoln himself were speaking directly to him. On set, Day-Lewis reportedly stayed in character at all times, with cast and crew addressing him as Mr. President throughout filming, and co-star Sally Field has said he would even text her in. Lincoln's voice and vocabulary between takes. During one unbroken take of Lincoln pleading with his cabinet to pass the amendment ending slavery, Spielberg was so overwhelmed that he left the set entirely. Day-Lewis, still fully in character, reportedly found him afterward and comforted him. Day-Lewis won his third Academy Award for Best Actor for that role, and Spielberg has said he has never fully recovered from watching that performance unfold in front of him. A very different kind of bond exists with Leonardo DiCaprio, who worked with Spielberg only once, on Catch Me If You Can in 2002, playing real-life con artist Frank Abagnale. The production moved at an extraordinary pace, filming in roughly 140 locations over just 52 days, and DiCaprio has said scenes expected to take days were sometimes finished in a single afternoon. Spielberg has admitted that before working with DiCaprio, he had believed much of the tabloid image surrounding him as a reckless party boy following the success of Titanic. Once they were actually making the film together, Spielberg met DiCaprio's family and came away describing him as grounded and close with his parents, nothing like the public narrative. Spielberg has spoken about the sharp, watchful intelligence in DiCaprio's eyes as exactly the quality needed to convincingly play a con man, and DiCaprio has joked in return that Spielberg is the real con artist of the two, referencing how a young Spielberg once talked his way onto a studio lot without actually being hired there. The two have discussed reuniting over the years, including talk of a project centered on Ulysses S. Grant, though nothing has materialized since. The final name on this list never earned an Oscar nomination working with Spielberg, and their creative output together was thin, limited to Robin Williams playing an adult Peter Pan in Hook in 1991 and lending his voice to AI artificial intelligence years later. But Williams belongs on this list because of something that had nothing to do with performance. In 1993, while Spielberg was shooting Schindler's List in Poland, carrying the emotional weight of dramatizing the Holocaust in the very country where it happened, Williams would regularly call him on the phone. He was not calling to talk business or check on progress. He would simply launch into roughly 15 minutes of pure improvised comedy for an audience of one, and then, right at the peak of the biggest laugh he could pull from Spielberg, he would hang up without saying goodbye. Spielberg has described those calls as exactly what he needed to survive the emotional weight of that shoot. When Williams died in 2014, Spielberg spoke about him as a kind of lightning storm of comic energy, and said their shared laughter had been the thunder that kept his friend going. Taken together, these six men reveal something honest about how Spielberg actually operates, far from the image of a director who simply commands a set. He let Ford rewrite one of cinema's most iconic scenes on instinct. He built an entire film around Dreyfuss as a version of himself. He surrendered control completely to Day-Lewis and was comforted by him in return. He followed Hanks through boot camps and battlefields across a decade of collaboration. He let go of his assumptions about DiCaprio and found the person underneath the headlines. And he allowed Robin Williams to carry him through grief with nothing but a phone call and a punchline.